Hello and welcome to my first YouTube exclusive video. Today we're going to be talking about the ins and outs of playing Groove Coaster. So if that's what you're here for, then, well, welcome. If not, well, I have a few other kinds of videos on my channel if you're wanting something different. But for now, class is in session. Okay, if you're watching this video, I imagine that you're probably one of a few kinds of people. Either you're genuinely curious about the game, that's what I'm figuring is the most likely. The video just came up and you're recommended somehow. I say somehow because nobody really knows how the YouTube algorithm works. You could be here simply because you're someone I know, possibly, and you want to support me, in which case, thank you. Or maybe you're someone who wants to come and see what things I get wrong or miss and want to point and laugh at me, in which case I still say thank you because you're still giving me a view. You know, works out either way, right? Alright, so when it comes to this video, it's going to be separated into several parts, and there should be timestamps if there's a specific section that you're looking for. Otherwise, you can just keep going from here. The place I'll be starting, which makes the most sense, in my opinion anyway, is starting with the actual controls. When I'm talking about these controls, I'm going to be referring to a couple of things which I'm going to define here, just in case you don't necessarily have familiarity with these terms specifically. Since there's two main versions of the Groove Coaster games that I'm going to be talking about here. There's the arcade versions, which are the primary main versions, but I'm also going to be talking about controls with regards to Groove Coaster YY Party, which is the version available for the Nintendo Switch. When I'm talking about the Switch game, I'll be referring to face buttons. Those are the 4 buttons on each Joy-Con, or on either side of your Pro Controller, whatever you're using. Namely, the A, B, X, and Y buttons on the right Joy-Con, or the up, down, left, and right buttons on the left Joy-Con. If I'm talking about booster buttons, that's the term that they gave to the buttons in the center of the sticks on the arcade version. With that out of the way, we can go into the first one of the different types of notes you'll have to hit. There are 9 different note types, and they've each got their own specific way of actually hitting them in order to score off. The first one you'll see is the most common, the hit, where all you need to do to get those ones is to hit any one of the face buttons if you're on YY Party, or on the arcade versions, hit either booster button, doesn't matter which one. Simple enough, right? Then there's the critical, which on the arcade version requires you to hit both booster buttons at the same time, while on the Switch version it's a little bit trickier because you need to hit 2 buttons, but it must be 1 button from each side. So for example, the A button and the left face button would work, the down face button and X would work, any combination like that. However, something like hitting the X and A button or the up and right buttons won't actually work for a critical, because it's effectively the same thing as hitting the same booster button for both face buttons, and therefore won't work. The third one we're going to go over is the hold note, exactly like it sounds like, just hold either booster button or any face button down until the end of the trail attached to it. Relatedly, there's the dual hold, which is literally just a critical that you hold down. So just keep each side pressed until the end of the trail. After that, now is when we start using the sticks. The fifth type of note is the slide, where it'll be pointing in a specific direction. Simply tilt either stick, this control applies to both versions, in whichever direction it's indicating. Number 6 is kind of predictable. The slide hold, tilt and hold in that direction until the end of the trail attached to the note. A thing to note about the different kinds of holds is if you let go early, then the note will break, and so will your combo. And you'll also lose a little bit of your groove gauge, the meter at the top of the screen. I'll go over that a little later. The next kind of note's the dual slide, where you can probably guess where this is going, where you need to use both sticks at the same time, one stick for each direction indicated. Number 8 is the beat, where it's pretty much like a string of hit notes. Simply keep hitting it repeatedly. You have to hit it with a certain amount of speed or else it'll break. But just keep repeatedly tapping while a beat is on the field until you reach the end of it, and you'll get the full credit for it. The last kind of note we're going to go over is the scratch. Whenever you see these little wiggly things, you do exactly that with either stick. Simply wiggle it back and forth until you've reached the end of the line. Actually, I kind of lied. There's actually a hidden 10th type of note, the ad-lib. These notes aren't going to show up on screen under most circumstances, unless you have the visible item active, at which point they'll be shown. I'll go over that in a little bit. They don't actually show up on the screen, but if you hit them like a standard hit note, and you hit the right spot in the song, then you'll end up activating them. You don't get penalized if you miss them, however, they are necessary for getting the highest possible score on a song, and you do gain points and combo if you actually do manage to find them. Typically, they're put in places where it'll make sense musically, so after you've gotten familiar with a song, you might even be able to, without thinking about it, just instinctively find where the ad-libs are. Once in a while, the songs will even have a little indicator telling you where the ad-lib is, but this is relatively uncommon. The best example I can think of is probably Senbon Sakura, or in YY Party it's translated to 1,000 Cherry Blossoms. They'll have little Sakura petal icons, as you can see over here, and those aren't actually notes, they're not regular hit notes, they're actually ad-libs. So you don't have to hit them, but you may as well, especially because they literally just hand them to you. Now that we've gone over the different types of notes, I should go over exactly how you pass a song by doing so. The meter I talked about at the top of the screen, the groove gauge, that is your measure of whether or not you're passing a song right now. It starts off somewhere around, I think, like 30% when you begin a song. You need to end the song with it at a point of 70% or more. Luckily, you don't actually have to track percentages or anything, because it's also color-coded. See, it starts off blue when you're not passing. However, if you're currently in range to pass the song, the meter will become yellow. Or it will start flashing between blue and yellow if it reaches 100%. But functionally, there is no difference between flashing and not flashing as long as it's still yellow. Anytime you successfully hit notes, the gauge will increase. If you miss a note or break a hold, then the gauge will decrease. With the exception, as I mentioned before, of ad-libs, where you do not gain or lose any meter for hitting them or not hitting them. They're simply there to increase the amount of points you can earn. With that, that'll be enough for the controls. I think you've got a basic idea of it now. So now I'm going to go over the different difficulties. Depending on which type of game you're playing, be it YY Party or the arcade versions, the difficulties will be named differently. However, they're functionally pretty much the same. On YY Party, there's easy, normal, hard, and master. Meanwhile, on the arcade versions, although as the caption says here, I'm actually using a screenshot from the Steam version because I couldn't find a proper shot of the arcade version, but it uses the same difficulty names. There's simple, normal, hard, and extra. Now, for YY Party, every song with the standard controls has all 4 difficulties. However, only the first 3 are unlocked by default whenever you get a new song. In order to unlock the master difficulty for a certain song, you need to reach the end of the hard mode version of it and pass. That's the only requirement. Meanwhile, it's a little different for unlocking the higher difficulties of songs in the arcade versions, because for some particularly nasty songs, even the normal chart can actually be locked until you've fulfilled certain requirements. Typically, it involves getting an S rank on every available difficulty up to that point, and in the case of anything difficulty 11 or above, you must also have gotten an S rank on something of the difficulty below it. So, for example, to unlock the ability to play level 11 charts for songs, you must S rank every difficulty before the chart you're trying to play, and have gotten an S rank on at least one difficulty 10 song. And it keeps going on like that up through the remaining difficulties. Also, something important to note, especially for beginners, the easy or simple, depending on which game you're playing, difficulty doesn't use all 9 basic note types. They all still have ad-libs, but as far as the basic types, the 2 difficulties I just mentioned only use the hit, critical, and hold. You will not see slides of any form, you will not see scratches, and you will not see dual holds. Now, let's talk about items. Earlier, I mentioned something called a visible item when I was talking about ad-libs. There's a wide variety of different items just like that one that can have different effects on your gameplay. For example, the visible one, as I was talking about before, gives you an indication of where ad-lib points are in a song. In this case, it leaves a little empty white circle on the spot on your rail line where you need to hit in order to successfully find the ad-lib. There's a number of other items that are beneficial to your gameplay, although some of them, due to making the songs easier, will also reduce your possible score because of the changes they make, while certain other ones will not. First, I'll mention the safe and super safe items. The safe item converts your first 10 missed notes into goods, the lowest successful rating. However, because it's still something other than a miss, your combo is preserved, which can help your score, and it also prevents you from losing groove gauge from those first 10 misses. There's a more advanced version called Super Safe, which is the exact same thing except for it works for 20 misses instead of 10. Next up, there's the one-handed item, which converts everything to, as the name implies, something that can be done with only one hand. So that means that all criticals become hits, all dual holds become regular holds, and all dual slides become regular slides. However, because these notes are being changed, it also reduces the amount of points you get from them, reducing your overall maximum score. This won't, however, reduce your ability to pass a song, because the only thing that gets reduced is the point value, not the groove gauge effect. Now, there's also some items that can make songs harder, some of which increase the amount of in-game currency you earn as a result. For example, the break item. With this active, you basically have 10 lives to complete a song with. If you get 10 misses during the course of a song, it ends immediately with a failure. But if you manage to complete the song under these conditions, instead, it increases the amount of groove coins you get, the in-game currency I mentioned before. So if you're particularly confident in a song, it can be a good way to generate a little bit of extra scratch if you need it for something. Now, there's a particularly nasty one over here called Just, which I hope you're really accurate, because anything that isn't a great result turns into a miss. So goods and cools are no longer good enough. They'll give you a miss just like flat out missing a note will. And if things like that still seem too easy, you can see just how well you've memorized the chart by using an item called Stealth. As you might figure with a name like that, the notes simply don't appear. You have to just know what to hit and when. And in the arcade version specifically, there's something that, if you can believe it, makes it even worse, where there's the impossible item, which will give you the effects of both Stealth and Just at the same time. There's 2 other somewhat stranger items that still add to the difficulty, but they're a little bit different from the other ones. Hidden and Sudden. Hidden will make the notes disappear shortly before they hit your avatar on the rail line, while Sudden will do the exact opposite. Notes won't appear until right before they hit your avatar. And speaking of the rail line, there's something a little bit different known as the No Way item, which makes the rail line disappear entirely, so that the notes will simply be floating in the screen instead of being on a specific line that you can follow. And now there's some modifiers that don't necessarily directly make a song easier or harder, though depending on the player, some of them might make it easier or harder, or depending on the song. There's the perfect player item, which makes the song play correctly regardless of what your hit results are, because one thing about Groove Coaster is if you make mistakes, it actually distorts the playback as a result. But with the perfect player item active, that doesn't happen. It plays the song correctly and even gives you an audio cue for when ad-libs are supposed to be hit. So it's like a somewhat less useful version of the visible item as well. Or more useful if you'd rather go off of audio cues instead of visual ones. Then there's two that change the arrangement of the notes instead. The mirror item flips the entire chart horizontally, while reverse does that, but also flips it vertically on top of it. Notably, a number of these in YY Party are not actually items, but instead are separate modifiers that you can turn on and off in any combination you want. Specifically, it's the mirror, no way, reverse, hidden, sudden, just, and stealth. Notably, you can create the impossible effect by having just and stealth added at the same time. And if you want to make it even worse for yourself, you can put both of those and activate the break item if you really want to just torment yourself. Now, the next subject's going to be a little bit different because it's not really a formal thing of how to play, but more of like a personal analysis of what types of challenges the game throws at you in order to make a song more difficult, fun, or interesting. And while I'm using the word challenge, I'm not referring to challenge mode, which is one of the different modes in YY Party. I might go over that in a separate video later, but that's not what I'm referring to here. The first of these challenges I'm going to be talking about is BPM, or beats per minute, basically how fast the song is. There's a lot of songs where the charts themselves are not necessarily extremely complex, but they become significantly more difficult simply because of the fact of how fast they move. Especially for less experienced players, they can be hard even just to read the chart or process what exactly you're supposed to do, much less actually hit the required notes. Some notable examples from YY Party's base game include Got More Raves and Bitter Heresy and Chocolate from the miscellaneous and Vocaloid sections respectively. The next one I want to go over is note density. This is my term for when there's a lot of notes squished really close to each other that typically require being hit in very rapid succession. One of my favorite examples for this is probably Two-Sided Lovers, or if you prefer the Japanese name, Ura Omote Lovers, from the Vocaloid section, especially on Master, as you can see with the video that should be on screen right about now. After that, there's note complexity. This is my term for when there's different kinds of notes that you have to hit one after the other that require some tricky switching of hand or finger or thumb position, depending on what your control method is. For example, there's parts in I'm using a lot of Vocaloid songs here, but there are a lot of what I end up playing. There's the song Ghost Rule from the Vocaloid section, which on Hard and Master especially has parts where you have slides and hits one after the other. Switching back and forth between them can be kind of tricky if you're not used to the back and forth of it. The last challenge type I want to go over is what I've simply termed interface attacks. There's a wide variety of different things that can happen, such as screen shaking, which is on the simpler end of these, from songs like Brain Power from the miscellaneous section. Again, talking about YY Party specifically, but a lot or all of these should be available in the arcade version as well. There's also other ones where they'll change the colors of notes, and sometimes it's just changing to match an aesthetic of a song. However, there are some that make it particularly difficult by whiting everything out, so that you have to recognize a note by shape instead of having shape and color to work off of, which if you've gotten used to identifying the notes by color, such as how regular holds are typically yellow, and criticals are usually blue. If everything is suddenly white, then it can become a little trickier. Some good examples of this would be Lost Colors on any difficulty from the original genre, or one of the Touhou remixes, Bad Apple, specifically uses this effect on the master chart. However, probably what I would consider the worst offender of the interface attack challenge is where it completely changes how the rail lines work. The most terrible example I can think of is probably an Indignant World from the miscellaneous section, and, well, just look at this mess. Now that I've gone over all of those, I wanted to add in some techniques that I've used to make things a little bit more manageable or a little bit easier here and there. Now, I do want to use a disclaimer, well, actually a couple of disclaimers. One, I am no expert. I am not especially super amazing at the game. I can do some master songs, but I've still got a long way to go before I can truly consider myself extremely good at the game. And two, what techniques work for one person, much like any other kind of learning or doing most other activities, don't necessarily work for everybody. So, even if I'm giving different kinds of advice here, feel free to try your own techniques and see what works for you. Because you may have a completely different method that works better for how you play. Anything I say here is not some sort of hard and fast rule. With that, let's get into it. For patterns like this, as I gone over earlier, where you've got hits and slides switching back and forth, what I like to do is have one hand deal with the hits, and the other hand deal with the slides. It can be a little bit tricky trying to get both hands to be doing different things at the same time, but this is an invaluable skill that will definitely pay off in dividends later, especially when you have to do things like this faster and faster with some harder songs. Now, the next tip I want to give is alternating hands. There's a lot of situations where you're going to want to switch back and forth between your left and right hand. For example, this clip from the beginning of Two-Sided Lovers, you can just try, even if you don't have a controller in front of you or anything right now, try hitting all of those hits with one hand versus trying to hit them with both hands alternating, and you'll see which one is probably easier. Okay, the next thing I want to go over is when you have hits and criticals back and forth, such as, now I don't know the Japanese name for this song, but from the Vocaloid section, there's Tale of the Deep Sea Lily, where the higher difficulties use a lot of this, where it'll have hits and criticals one right after the other, as you can see here. And similar to the note about things like hits and slides together, I like to use one hand is specifically for hitting the critical notes, while one hand hits every note, including the regular hits. So one is going every other note, while one is hitting every note you see in the given line. A lot of times, even I'm tempted to just hit everything as a critical so that I don't miss any of them. However, unless you have really good synchronization between your hands, this can wind up leading to a lot of misses because of hitting things so far outside the timing that you lose credit for the note entirely. So that's why I generally find it a better and safer option to simply have one hand dedicated just to being a second hand for criticals, while the other hand is the primary hand that you're using for everything. And now, the last tip I've got is one that it may seem kind of obvious, but it's still probably the most important tip I can give you. Remember that Groove Coaster is a rhythm game. That means a certain amount of knowing the songs that you're playing is going to make them significantly easier to play. And remember that while the notes on screen, the visual indicator is important, obviously, because that's how you know what to hit, the music should be your primary measure of when to hit. With these thoughts in mind, if you can find things like a YouTube video or have a copy of the song or songs that you want to work on improving at, try listening to them without the game context in mind if you're not already familiar with them. As I said before, being familiar with a song is going to help you to an incredible degree. And besides, you're probably playing a rhythm game because you like at least some of the music in it, right? It's not just background music here, it's a key component of the gameplay, so make sure you take advantage of the fact that it's there. Practice, fatigue, and determination. Unless you're some kind of rhythm game savant or have some other experience, you'll probably struggle a lot at first when playing the game. This may even last for a long time depending on your learning style and how much you get to play. The most important thing you can do here is practice. This is especially true once you get far enough into where you can identify specific kinds of things that you have a weakness toward. If you find a particular kind of note pattern that you're not very good at, look around and see if you can find a song on an easier difficulty that has a similar note pattern but in a less difficult form, and then train yourself on that until you can basically keep your combo on that pretty much in your sleep, and then go back and try the thing you're working on again. You might be surprised just how much working on a specific thing can wind up completely changing your capabilities. Sometimes, kind of like in RPGs, you need to level up your abilities. Only I'm not talking about like a game character here, I'm talking about you, the one currently watching and listening to this video. Sort of like running can build up stamina and strength training can build power over time, working on the techniques you're shaky on will only help you out later when you're challenged on if you've got them down correctly or not. Now, regarding fatigue, it may be easier to forget sometimes, but fingers have muscles too. They can get tired just like any other muscle if you're pushing them for a while, or they can cramp or have any number of other things happen. You might find this happens pretty fast earlier on, but that's fine. As long as you keep playing and pushing yourself, your natural stamina will increase just like with any other exercise. You just have to keep at it. This in turn leads to my last point, determination. Undertale reference aside, some songs are going to kick your teeth in. It's pretty much guaranteed to happen eventually, and it can be frustrating if you keep failing the same one over and over again. I can't count how many times I've played Ghost Roll on Master and I still have yet to clear it. But probably this is going to be the most important advice I can give you next to the note about remembering that it's a rhythm game. And unlike that, this can actually apply to almost anything, not necessarily just Groove Coaster. The thing you've got to remember is never give up. As long as you put in the work and practice, figure out your weaknesses in order to defeat them, you'll be able to break through whatever kind of barrier you're dealing with. Just gotta keep at it. Conclusion. That's all I have for this basic tutorial for Groove Coaster. I hope you've been able to get a little bit of something out of it. Is there anything else you'd like to know or see? Any specific questions you've got? Let me know in the comments below and I might just make another video to answer them. And speaking of future videos, I alluded to it a little earlier, but I'm planning on making a specific video talking about the specific differences between YY Party versus the arcade versions. So I hope you'll look forward to that, which should be out sometime in the future. Until then, see you next time, and thanks for watching. This is JQ, signing off.